Our speaker tonight is Brother Don Blackwell, born in Charleston, South Carolina, and grew up attending that congregation there in North Charleston. He obeyed the gospel there in 1983. It was in 91 that he married Sherry Shepherd. They have 3 children and how many grandchildren now? Have 1 grandchild. That's grand enough. I'll tell you, Don's a veteran of the U.S. Air Force. He worked in AF Intelligence as an imagery interpreter. In 94, he moved to Memphis, Tennessee to attend the Memphis School of Preaching, graduated in 96, has done local work in Alabama, North Carolina, North Charleston, South Haven, Mississippi, and also now is the local preacher for the Willow Avenue Church of Christ in Cookeville, Tennessee. He continues to serve as the executive director of the Gospel Broadcasting Network and serves on the board of directors for World Video Bible School, is the host of the video series The Truth About, and is the author of the book The Truth About Moral Issues. And he and his wife Sherry are a wonderful couple to be around, and I'll tell you, the subject that he's going to speak on tonight is much needed. Magnify him even when life is hard. It may be easy to magnify him when things are going well. What do we do when things take a different turn? My privilege tonight is to present to you a gospel preacher to address this very subject, Brother Don Blackwell.
Good evening. Just a few minutes ago, Brother Jim Dearman came in and he and I were speaking in the foyer. I had done a gospel meeting somewhere not long after I got out of the hospital, and Jim came over to see me that night, and I had just recently had an MRI. And I was talking to Jim about it, and I was explaining to him the process and how claustrophobic I am. And so I went in to get this MRI, and they slid me into this little tube, and they put a cloth over my eyes, and they told me, don't remove that. Well, about 60 seconds in, the curiosity just got the best of me, and I pulled that cloth off, and I started screaming, get me out of here. And so they took me out. I was telling Jim about this, and Jim said, well, you know, they've got things they can give you to help relax you and, you know, even knock you out, things like Valium. And I said, Jim, that's not strong enough. It's going to have to be something stronger than that. And he said, have you tried listening to some of your own sermons? So that's a true story, isn't it, Jim? Okay. Magnify His name when life is hard. This month marked 2 years ago that I started a gospel meeting in Salem, Virginia, at the West Side Church of Christ. Brother Eddie Gilpin was the preacher there at the time. This is actually a slide from their website of their worship services. I arrived on Saturday, and I knew it was going to be a fun week for us. Sherry went with me. There was going to be preaching. There was going to be fellowship. There was going to be time that Sherry and I could spend together. I preached that Sunday, and then that Sunday night after services, Sherry and I went and ate at Cracker Barrel. I took this, you know, we document our whole lives with our iPhones now, so we were eating at Cracker Barrel. We were looking forward to the next day because Monday, Eddie had invited us to come over to their house to visit. We were going to visit with Eddie and Jeannie, and then they said we were going to go eat at a cafe that was nearby. So we arrived at their house and we visited for about an hour, and then they said, well, let's go to the cafe. We went outside and they had 2 4-wheelers sitting there, and I thought, what in the world kind of cafe are we going to on 4-wheelers? But we got on them. Eddie and Jeannie got on the first one. Sherry and I got on the second one to follow them, and they led us across their property out to a spread they had set up in the woods here, and it was a great meal. And we visited. It was a cafe that they personally had set up for us to eat, and it was a great day. You really could not have asked for anything better. When we got through eating, they said, would you like to see our property? And we said, certainly. And so we got on the 4-wheelers and we went up to the top of the hill, and I got my iPhone out and I took this picture. You can't really tell it, but this is really looking down a hill here. And you can see that it's a gorgeous place. Eddie said, "Would you like me to take a picture of you?" And so I handed him my phone, and he took this picture of me and Sherry at the top of the hill on the four-wheeler. This was just minutes before our accident occurred. We started riding down this particular hill, and this is where I go blank. I don't really know what happened. Apparently, somewhere along the way, we hit something, and they say that the four-wheeler flipped 4 times. It threw Sherry off in one direction, and I flew off in the other direction. When I hit the ground, it broke my back, and it severed my spinal cord. Eddie said that when he got to me, I was unconscious, and he thought I was dead. Sherry said that where she was, she couldn't see, but she could hear me. She could hear Eddie calling my name, but I wasn't responding. She said that she was lying there and she was praying to God that I wasn't dead and that I wasn't brain damaged. She said after a bit, I came to, and I still don't remember any of this, but Eddie said I began to say, "I can't feel my legs. I can't feel my legs." Sherry said at a distance, she could just hear me groaning and my speech was slurred and I was obviously hurting, and I was saying, "I can't breathe. Please move me. Please lift me." But of course, Eddie wasn't going to do that. He was afraid he might injure me. And so they called 911. An ambulance came out. The ambulance very quickly determined it was beyond their capabilities, and they called a medevac helicopter that flew me to the hospital in Roanoke, Virginia. When I got to the hospital, they determined that I had a broken back and a cracked sternum and a cracked C1 vertebrae at the base of my skull, and that I had severed my spinal cord. They operated on me and they fused 5 vertebrae together. In fact, here is a shot of my x-ray, my MRI. You can see my spinal cord. When I tell people I broke my back, it is literally broken in half. And I went back and I added this slide for those who were curious about the hardware that I have in my back now, holding it together. After a day or two, I don't know how long it was actually, but the doctor woke me up in the hospital there in Virginia, and I was very confused. The last thing I remember was riding down the hill in the four-wheeler, and he woke me up, and I said, "Where am I?" And he said, "You're in the hospital." And I said, "Why? What happened?" And he said, "You were in a four-wheeler accident." And after a minute, it occurred to me that I could not feel my body. I am what they call a T6 complete. From about this point down, I'm completely paralyzed. I'm a paraplegic. And I realized I couldn't feel my legs. And I said to him, "I can't feel my legs." And he said, "You're paralyzed." And I said, "Will I ever walk again?" And he said, "I'm not God." He said, "But probably not." I thought it was a dream. You ever have those dreams that are so bad and you think, "I'm going to go back to sleep and I'm going to wake up"? And of course, I had a lot of drugs in me, so I went back to sleep and I woke up and it was still that way, and I went back to sleep, and I kept doing this for several days until I finally woke up and I realized this was not a dream. And I was absolutely devastated. After a few days, they airlifted me to the Shepherd Center in Atlanta, Georgia, where I spent the next 2.5 months going through some very painful rehab. After I'd been in the hospital for a few days, the directors from Polishing the Pulpit showed up, and they asked me if I would come at PTP and talk about the experience and things that I had learned. I didn't know at that point if I would even be out. I did get out of the hospital just a few days prior to PTP, and I was able to go and speak. This was a shot from behind the scenes. At the time that I did it, my body was still having spasms. It was very difficult. If you haven't seen it, it was a very emotional delivery for me. I think it's still on YouTube if you wanted to go see it. But it's been 2 years, and a lot has happened since then. I had thought about originally when BJ asked if I would speak on MSOP that I was going to have to do a manuscript. I said, "I can't do that. I just got out of the hospital." And he said, "We'll transcribe your lesson from PTP and we'll put it in the book. And if you want to, you can deliver that lesson." And I was thinking I was going to do that. Of course, because of COVID, there was no lectureship last year. Well, it's been 2 years, and a lot has changed. And so what I'm going to do tonight is this. I have taken the lesson that I put together 2 years ago, and I've gone back and revised it from my perspective 2 years out. And so what I'm going to do tonight is three things. I'm going to make some observations and some applications. I'm going to talk about some benefits of suffering. And then finally, I'm going to talk about getting through tragedy, magnifying the name of God when we're hurting. Number one tonight, I'm going to talk about some observations and some applications that I have learned from this. Observation number one is this. Brethren, I have learned from this experience that God uses broken people. Before this accident, I was a very confident person. I felt like I could do anything. After the accident, I have been filled with doubt. I feel very self-conscious about my abilities, about my appearance. I told Sherry after the accident, I said, I will never be offered a good preaching job again. Who wants a paraplegic? I'm thankful that I have gotten a good preaching job. But this is something that I got to thinking about. God uses broken people. And if you think about the Bible, think about some of the characters. I could list many, but you know, when Moses was called to lead God's people, Moses said, I'm slow of speech. The Hebrew carries with it the idea probably that he stuttered. He was a stutterer. Could you imagine a stutterer leading the nation today? Think about David and all of the family problems David had. And of course, the sin he committed with Bathsheba that was the start of these things. Rahab had previously been a prostitute. Naomi, of course, was a widow. Of course, she had lost her 2 sons and her husband. You think about Joseph, who had been abused by his brothers. He'd been sold into slavery. Abraham was old, and he faced these things. You think about Paul was a Pharisee in his past, killing Christians. I could go on, but brethren, God uses broken people. And the more I have thought about this, I thought all of us are broken in some way, are we not? But we can't become like the one-talent man who was afraid and went and hid his talent in the ground. A wise older Christian said to me, he said, Don, no one has a greater witness for Christ than the one who is broken. Now, he wasn't using the term witness like the denominational world used it. What did he mean by that? Do you remember what Satan said to God about Job in Job chapter 1 and verse 9? Do you remember? He said, does Job fear God for nothing? He said, have you not made a hedge around him and around his house and about all that he has on every side? You've blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions are now increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and surely he will curse you to your face. That is, he said, he is serving you because his life is good, because he is rich, because he has everything going for him. But he said, you let crisis befall him, and he'll walk away. Brethren, when times are hard, and they will be, magnify the Lord with your faithfulness, and you'll have more credibility with the world. That's what my friend was saying. Here's a second thing that I have observed from this. Grief has no timeline. When I was in the hospital, we received approximately 2,800 cards. I know this because my dad was there every day, and he was so bored, he started a sheet and he counted every single card. He decided, I'm going to hang them all over the room. I think we got 1,800, and we finally ran out of room. Many of the cards that came in had Chick-fil-A gift cards in them, and I joked we'll be eating Chick-fil-A till the Lord comes again. But we did finally run out, hint, hint. We don't have any more at this point. But many of the people that came in, they saw all of these cards, and they were impressed. And they said, are you somebody famous? And I said, I'm a Christian. I said, that's what Christians do. But it made an impression on everybody. I was in the hospital with Kenny Rogers. Here's a picture of one day of Kenny and I sitting in the hospital. Somebody observed, they said, Kenny Rogers didn't get as many cards as you. I said, Kenny Rogers was not a Christian. We tried to tackle that. But when I got home from the hospital, the cards kept coming for a while. We counted them until we got somewhere around 4,000, and then slowly they stopped. Well, that's natural. But the grief didn't stop. In fact, when I got home, it got worse. Because when I got home, one of the first things I did was I rolled into my office at the house, and my wheelchair wouldn't go under the desk because I was hitting the drawer, and it just kind of shook me. And I went to get something out of my filing cabinet, and I couldn't reach it. It was too high for me. And we went outside, and I tried to get into my pickup truck. I picked my leg up, and I laid it up in there, and I tried to pull myself up, and I just couldn't do it. And we sold it. Sherry and I would always walk the neighborhood. We would always walk the neighborhood together because that's something that we like to do. And I couldn't do it. So many of the physical pleasures that I had were taken away. And one of the things that really hurt me was my ability to help others. Just things like yesterday, Sherry and I have been married 30 years, and in all those years, she scarcely ever pumped gas. I always kept her car full of gas. I can't do it now. It hurts me. I would always carry things for other people. At GBN, if Lori was going to carry a box, I would run out and get it. I can't do it. I would help other people move, do repairs. Now I depend on people doing everything for me. And then there's the 25-pill-a-day regiment that I'm taking. I won't even go into the physical issues because it would take a long time. But where am I going with this? Brethren, where I'm going is the cards stopped, but life moved on. You go back to work, and I've learned that people really don't want to hear about your pain all the time. They want to hear that things are good and you're moving on. And so you put on a happy face and you do the best that you can. And there's a loneliness that comes with this because nobody really understands what you're going through unless they've been there. Unless you're a paraplegic or a quadriplegic, you don't know what I'm going through. But it made me realize that there are other brethren, when I got to thinking about that, other brethren who are experiencing pain in the same way. I don't know what they're going through. I think about a widow or a widower, someone who's lost their children. And I thought about the lost loved one and how in the beginning, brethren surround them, and after the funeral, their family is there, and then how they go home, and then the pain really begins. And since my accident, I have had people reach out to me, I don't know how many, that saw the lesson from PTP, maybe hundreds of them, and they've talked about losses of loved ones and cancer and divorces and all sorts of pain and suffering that they've gone through, and it made me think grief doesn't have a timeline. The next thing that I want to observe is in relation to God's will. Since this accident, I have repeatedly had people say to me, well, Don, it happened for a reason. It was God's will, or words to that effect. It's part of the plan. Brethren, I do not believe that. I do not believe that God wrecked me on a four-wheeler. And if we are not careful, we get dangerously close to Calvinism and suggest that God does everything for a reason. Now, the fact of the matter is, God has given us free will, and He allows us to suffer the consequences of our actions. You know, sometimes a drunk driver will hit and kill a young child, and some well-meaning person will say to the parents, well, God must have wanted another flower in heaven or something like that. Folks, no wonder people get angry at God. That wasn't God's will. That was a violation of God's will. Somebody got drunk and violated God's will and killed that young person. We need to be very careful. We need to understand that not everything that happens is God's will. Now, don't get me wrong. That doesn't mean that God can't use it. After my accident, when I went back home, they were converting my bathroom so that I could get in it. And the contractors who worked on my house, we taught those 4 men and we baptized them. Here is a picture of the 4 men, and one of them is here with us tonight, Brother Ken Winstead. He's the man in the front in the black and white in the picture. No, he's not a convict. That's just what he's wearing. But Ken is here with us tonight. You can speak to him. The brother that's in the orange, this is Brother Charles Warren. He just texted me a couple of weeks ago talking about someone that he had gone back home and taught the gospel to. And they have obeyed the gospel because of this. Here's the next thing. Brethren, I have learned that to live is Christ and to die is gain. That's Philippians 1:21. Verse 23, Paul said, for I am hard pressed between the two, that is, living for Christ or dying. I'm hard-pressed between the two. He said, I have a desire to depart and be with Christ, which is far better. Look at those things. To die is gain. It is far better. Now, this doesn't mean Christians should go around being suicidal, but it does mean to die is gain. Brethren, what we don't want to do is put physical life over spiritual life. And I'm afraid in the last year we've slipped into this. To live is Christ, and to die is gain. Here's the next point. I want to talk about some benefits of suffering. Number one, suffering teaches us to pray. Now, I'm going to admit to you something that's very personal, and it's rather embarrassing to me to admit. In the last 2 years, I have struggled with my prayers. And the reason I have struggled is because it seems like God hasn't answered me. And I have begged God, let me walk again. And I have asked brethren all over the country to pray for me. And I get messages, brethren are praying for me. I don't know how many people here have said, you've been praying for me, but the months just keep rolling on, and the pain is still there, day in and day out, and the emotional pain is worse than the physical pain. It's caused me to be shaky in my prayer life. It's caused me to dig and study prayer unlike I ever have before. And I wanted to share with you some things that have helped me. In 2 Corinthians 12 and verse 7, Paul said, "And lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. Concerning this thing, I pleaded the Lord 3 times." He said, 3 times I asked about this, that it might depart from me. He prayed 3 times, but the answer was no. In Luke 22 and verse 41, the Bible says about Jesus, He said, "Father, if it is your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." Then an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. Then his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. Mark 14:39 says, "And again he went away and prayed and spake the same words." Matthew 26:44 says, "And he left them, and he went away again and prayed the 3rd time, saying the same words." Brethren, this prayer is a cry of his humanity for deliverance. Hebrews 5 and verse 7 says, "He offered up prayers with vehement cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death." He prayed earnestly, he prayed in agony, he prayed repeatedly, and the answer was no. Why? Because the will of the Father needed to be done. And it brought to my mind, could it be that when I'm praying for relief, that there's something more important than my pain? Could it be that there are souls that need to be reached and could be reached if I will remain in this condition? I'm thinking about ending my pain, but the Lord sees souls and He sees opportunities. Could it be that there's someone who's searching for the truth, and providentially I will be the way for them to learn, but it will be from the chair? You know, maybe there's a person who has a hard heart, but my condition will help open their heart. Maybe there's someone who's going to be encouraged to persevere because of me. I would like to recommend to each of you Brother Dan Winkler's book, "Something Happened When I Prayed," because it's helped me. When I pray, the Father inclines His ear toward me. Psalm 86. In fact, that's repeated several times in the Psalms. The Hebrew word carries with it the idea of stretching out, bending over, bowing toward. Quite literally, God leans toward me to listen when I pray. When I pray, the Son sits at the right hand of God and makes intercession for me. Hebrews 7:25. That means He defends me. He speaks on my behalf. He is one who has been there where I am, and He's poured out His heart in prayer. When I pray, the Holy Spirit intercedes before the throne of God. Romans 8:26 and 27. I have gotten to when I pray, I have started envisioning this. In my mind, I envision the Father, and I envision the Son, and I envision the intercession, and I envision Him listening to me and defending me and interceding for me. And it has given me more confidence than I have ever had in prayer before. I want to suggest to you a second benefit of suffering is that it humbles us. This entire experience has greatly humbled me. Before the accident, I was physically strong. I was financially well off. I was good looking, or at least Sherry said that. I had control of my life. When everything is going your way, it's easy to get full of yourself. It is easy to feel self-sufficient. But an accident like this makes you realize how much you depend on God. A whole team of highly skilled doctors could not do anything to fix me. During this accident, it has humbled me in a way I've never been humbled. I watched my dad, who's 77 years old, picking up my... I watched my dad, who's 77 years old, picking up my lame body and moving it around. I've had several occasions now when I was coming down the ramp out of my chair and the front casters would hit something and it's thrown me out on the ground. One day at GBN, I was coming down the ramp. I was in the back parking lot and I hit something and it threw me out on the concrete into the gravel. And about that time, I saw Aaron Gallagher coming into the parking lot in the front, and I yelled to him from the ground, "Come and get me." When you have to have one of your coworkers pick your lame body up off the ground because you can't crawl back into your wheelchair, brethren, it's humiliating. And it's maybe the most humbling thing I've ever had in my life. James 4 and verse 6 says, "Therefore God resists the proud and gives grace to the humble." Maybe it benefits us to be humbled and broken in some way, not to be self-sufficient. Number 3, suffering makes us sympathetic toward others. Romans 12:15 tells us to weep with those who weep. Galatians 5:22 lists as one of the fruits of the Spirit kindness. One thing this injury has done for me is it has made me be more patient with people. Somebody said to me, "It makes you more patient? I would think it would make you be less patient." I said, "No, when you go through this and people wait on you all the time, it makes me so much more patient." I look at it differently. I want to be perpetually kind to people. I'll give you an example of this. It used to be when I was going down the road and someone was pull out in front of me really slowly, that would make me so mad. But now when I pull out slowly because I'm trying not to sling my wheelchair across the van, I get to thinking, maybe they got a wheelchair in their van. Maybe they're in this type of situation. I look at things differently. When I pull in a parking lot now and I see people pulling into the handicap spot and jump out and run in, I look at it differently than I used to look at it. And it happens all the time. I look at people who are suffering. And I think about people who have lost their spouse, that have had the death of a child, cancer, divorcee, miscarriage. I've had people reach out to me. I know I don't understand, but I feel suffering differently. Brethren, I've got the idea half of the people in this room tonight are broken and are suffering with something. And we need to realize, I realize I'm not alone in that. Here's the next one. Suffering purifies us. Now, what do I mean by that? When I realized how close I came to dying, it made me search my life for shortcomings and for sin. It made me realize at any moment I could be thrust into eternity, and I don't want to have some sin in my life that would be the cause of me going to hell. 2 Corinthians 13:5 says, "Examine yourselves whether you're in the faith." Test yourselves. When he says whether you're in the faith, he doesn't mean whether you're a Christian. This is written to Christians. This means whether you're in the faith, whether you're walking in the light. Examine your life as a Christian. Psalm 119 and 67, David said that he went astray before he was afflicted. What does that mean? His affliction in some ways caused him to get his life better. Psalm 119 and verse 71, David said, "It is good for me that I have been afflicted, that I might learn your statutes." Some benefits that come with this. how do I get through the tragedies of life? Number one, I want to suggest one of the things that I have learned is that you don't live in the past. That you don't live in the past. I want you to listen to this passage from Ecclesiastes 7 and verse 10. I do know the context. He says, "Do not say, 'Why were the former days better than these?' For you do not inquire wisely concerning this thing." Let me read that again. "Do not say, 'Why were the former days better than these?' You do not inquire wisely in these things." One of the greatest torments I have found since my accident is living in the past. When I sit and I contemplate how good the past was before the accident, it takes me to a bad place. And it can be almost anything. I can think how much I miss just walking around my yard. I can think how much I miss just jumping out and running into a store, or even stopping and very quickly pumping gas in my car, or something like that. I have found living in the past takes me to bad places. It is a tormentor. Some people do that with regard to sin. They keep beating themselves up over the past, and they can't get beyond it. That's the thing about the past, is it's in the past. You can't change it. Each one of us has to pick up where we are. Philippians 3:13, again, I know the context. Listen to what Paul says. He says, "This one thing I do, forgetting those things that are behind and reaching forth unto those things which are before, I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus." Now, Paul had some things in his past that could have haunted him, but brethren, what I'm saying is this: we can let bad things in our past torment us and hold us back. We can let good things in our past torment us and hold us back, but either way, it's in the past. And I got to let go of it. Here's the next thing. To help get through tragedy, I would suggest we need to count our blessings. You know, it's the song, "Count your many blessings, name them one by one. It will surprise you what the Lord has done." Is that biblical? Listen to this. Psalm 103 and verse 2, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all of His benefits." What's he saying? Count your many blessings. There's a lot of that in the Psalms. Some days I find myself thinking this. I think, I've got it worse than anybody. Who has it worse than me? I'm a paraplegic. And then I get to thinking, I've got it better than anybody. Who has it better than me? And I start thinking about these things. When I get to thinking, I'm a paraplegic, I can't walk, I can't feel, I stop and I make myself think this way. What's the point? Count your many blessings. I get to thinking, I can still work. I've got a good job. I can still travel and drive. I've got a good vehicle. I've got a nice house. I've got the best wife who loves me and takes care of me. You know, in the hospital, one of the nurses that took care of me at Shepherd Center told us it is very common that after an accident like this, the person's spouse will leave them and get a divorce and say something like, "I didn't sign up for this." Brethren, the point I'm making is this is a matter of perspective. So much of life has to do with what goes on in our minds. It makes me think about Numbers chapter 11. You remember God rescued the children of Israel from Egypt and He gave them food from heaven. But listen to their attitudes here. Numbers chapter 11 and verse 4, they said, "Who will give us meat to eat? We remember the fish that we freely ate in Egypt, and the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic. But now our whole being is dried up, and there is nothing except this manna before our eyes." That verse made me think about me. I'm sitting there thinking about, I wish I had all the blessings that I used to have instead of the blessings that God's given me now. One thing that I have to do is stop counting my bruises and count my blessings, and it will change my feelings. Number 3, I remember why I'm here. I read this at PTP. I'm going to read it to you again. It's from the book Let This Cup Pass by Jane McWhorter. She says, "We are here to prepare ourselves for life after death. It doesn't matter whether we live 50 years or 100 years. Neither does it matter whether those years are carefree or filled with sorrow. The only consideration of lasting importance is where we will spend eternity." You see, sometimes I get to thinking, I'm so unhappy because I miss my pickup truck. Or I'm so unhappy because you fill in the blank, whatever physical pleasure you want to put in that blank, and that depresses me. And I'm afraid that all too often we have fallen into the trap of thinking that that's why we're here. We think that we're here because I'm going to fix up my house, I'm going to take a vacation so I can get that motorcycle, I can buy that boat, I can have that camper and that RV, and if something happens that impedes that or hurts me in those physical areas and I'm not happy and entertained, then I become miserable. I have to remember that's not why I'm here. John 9 and verse 4, Jesus said, I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day, for the night cometh when no man can work. That's why I'm here. How much time did Jesus spend on his yacht? How much time did Jesus spend taking camel tours with his disciples? How much time did Jesus spend fishing for the big bass that he could hang on the wall? I'm not saying it's wrong to do those things. I'm saying that sometimes we lose focus of why we're here. And so, when I remember that, it doesn't hurt so bad when I lose those things. Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 13, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole of man. I wish King James hadn't put the word duty in there. It's more powerful without it. This is the whole of man. Number 4. To get through tragedy, I remember that Christianity makes all the difference. One day I was in the hospital. It was Father's Day. And my youngest daughter, Lauren, and her husband came to visit. And when they left, I was very sad. You know, the emptiness when the family leaves and you're there alone and you're in the hospital, and I was just very sad and low. And my phone sent me a memory. You know, the iPhone creates these little memories from your picture and it puts them to music, and it sent me a memory. I was curious. I opened it. And it was a Disney vacation that my family had made together. And I opened this video up. And there was a picture of me standing there with my family. And I had my arms around them. And I was thinking, I will never be able to do this again. Brethren, it brought me very low. And I thought, how can I go on like this? I can't live like this. And then I thought to myself, I'm a Christian. And I thought, this is all temporary. And I thought, I'm going to die and go to heaven. And it got me through it. And I got to thinking about all the other people in the hospital. And I got to thinking, that's misery. I thought, can you imagine living your life as a paraplegic or a quadriplegic and dying and being lost? Or could you imagine your life as a healthy person and dying and being lost? And it puts things in perspective. I have a mission. I want to reach people with the gospel. I wanted to reach every person in that hospital. I started trying to go to people's rooms and look for opportunities to teach them. And whether I'm a 1-talent man or a 2-talent man or a 5-talent man, or whether I'm a 2-talent man who used to be a 5-talent man, whatever it is, I want to use all of that to reach souls with the gospel and to magnify the name of the Lord. Brethren, I will magnify the name of God if during my suffering and when I'm hurting, I will hold to Him and I will be faithful. Because the world will look to that, and that will make them magnify Him. If I could trade all of my earthly possessions, my house and my car, my money, everything I have, and I knew that I could walk again tomorrow and my body would be back to normal, I would not give it a thought. I absolutely would do it. I wouldn't stop and think. But there's one thing that I would never trade, and that is my soul. We need to offer an invitation. Matthew 16:26. For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what should a man give in exchange for his soul? Each person here tonight has a soul. Each one here tonight has a body. The body's going to fail you. It hasn't yet. Mine's broken early, but yours is going to fail you eventually. But you have a soul that will be somewhere for eternity. Tonight, are you preparing for that? If you're here and you're not a New Testament Christian, you've got the opportunity right now while you're still living to prepare for that, to have something that transcends this life and the broken body and the pain. You have something to live for. To become a child of God, you need to hear the gospel. Believe it. Repent of your sins. Confess your faith in Christ. Be baptized in water for the remission of your sins. Maybe tonight you're here and you're ready to do that. Maybe you say, I've never heard that. Then you did me a disservice by just rattling that off. If you haven't heard it, come and talk to me afterwards and we'll sit down and open the Bible and have a study tonight. Maybe you're here as a member of the Lord's church and you've got sin in your life of a public nature that needs to be taken care of publicly. If that is the case, we would be very honored if we could go to God and pray for you tonight. This evening, if you need to respond to the Lord's invitation, won't you come? As together we stand and sing the invitation song.